and I've worked with a lot of schools around the world to help get that mission of sports safety out there. Disclaimer, please, as I'm going to talk about this information, please do go through your risk management channels. Please do indeed follow any local laws that you may have that may involve a little research on your end. But generally, in your respective countries, there's not going to be a lot of legality behind some of these policies I'm going to be talking. A lot of these policies that I'm going to be talking about are based out of North America. So I'm guessing that in your respective countries, they don't really exist. So why are we going to talk about this? This is child protection and safeguarding. This is a huge topic in the international school setting. We generally think of this as neglect or abuse of child protection and safeguarding, but we are talking about protecting their bodies, protecting their brains, to protecting their hearts from sudden cardiac arrest. So I have encountered some ADs that have kind of confided in me that they've received pushback from administration on implementing these sort of things. And so I would hope that your respective institutions that's not the case. But if you do, this is coming from an athletic director that said this to me one time: if we can't protect a child's life, what good are we? Why even have athletics if we can't ensure safety for our kids? And a good litmus test for your respective program and the athletic conferences in general, all international schools. Are you confident in all your coaches responding to an emergency, whether it be a sudden cardiac arrest, a significant concussion, some of these other conditions we're going to talk about? Now imagine that child is yours. Are you confident in all your coaches to be able to handle a true emergency? I think most people would be hesitant in that. Most programs in general. So we can use that as a gauge on self-reflection on what direction we would like our program to go into. Let me pull up my pointer here. Okay, great. So my goals are to build a culture towards safe and accessible student-athlete experience through advocacy and awareness, by informing and educating about these sorts of topics that tend to be kind of lacking in general in the international school industry, and then assisting and updating policies towards that, and give you the practical resources and tools to implement those sorts of things. But please note, as you navigate this process of policy, I'm just pulling up, great. As you navigate your own personal process towards these policies, not one size fits all. I can't cookie cut a policy and just make it extrapolate that to all the international schools. This is gonna, I'm sorry, but this is gonna require some work and some strategy on the administrative side at your institution. So there's not, like I said, there's not a copy and paste type of policy out there. All your schools are different. So you know your schools best, and I can help facilitate navigating that. But it's going to take a process on your end, and work in collaborating with your colleagues as well. There's no static policy, so it's not like, okay, we did it, we're done, wash our hands of it. These policies are very dynamic, and it's going to be subject to updating and trial and error. And so as you approach this, please just, your mental approach to this, please just have a long-term strategic view to that. That this is going to be a work in progress for some time. It's not going to be a one-shot deal. And please know, I know we put a lot on our coaches. Coaches may not know it, and parents may not know it, but they want this. They want sports safety policy. They want to know about concussions. They want to know what the emergency plan is. And once you put it in place and educate why, and they experience it themselves, I get a lot of feedback that, how did we ever go without this sort of thing? How did we ever go about with these education policies before? And another good litmus test, again, if a coach gives you pushback on implementing sports safety policy, or they drag their feet on it, do you really want a coach like that in your program? Just something to think about. Okay. So as I'm talking, please kind of take notes in your head about some of these items that I'm going to be outlining up in your respective athletic conference. Ideally, what you want to do with sports safety topics is create a minimum and coordinated standard or expectation at the conference level. And then you use that, regarding emergency planning, concussions, key illnesses, or any other topic that you feel is important to cover. Like I had a great discussion with Mike earlier this week. One of your threat risk analysis is also, terrorism within the conference. It's very unfortunate, but as you're addressing the policies and protocols, you create kind of a minimum coordinated standard, a minimum threshold that we would want every conference to have in place. And then that helps drive each individual institutional policy and procedure. That I know at my school, I need to develop this sort of policy. And for for the benefit of my conference, I have to reach this minimum standard. So as I'm going, I may touch upon this would be a great minimum standard to put in place in the respective topics I'm covering today. So first is going to be emergency planning. Why do we need to have this? Obviously, there's a higher risk in sport for a possible emergency to come up, a severe, ugly fracture dislocation, a compound fracture, in your conference, exertional heat illness, sudden cardiac arrest, really bad concussions, a spinal cord injury. Higher risk of that happening, and time is critical in these emergency situations. And we also have to think about we're hosting large events as well. So it's not only our student athletes, it's all the people that are attending as well. We need to make sure that if we're hosting an event, that there's safety for everyone involved. From experience, actually, most of the emergencies that I've been a part of or I've heard about from colleagues, usually the emergency is actually the officials or the guests. A sudden cardiac arrest of a grandpa coming to visit, or a parent that has a heart condition, or an official who's not in great shape and they collapsed in the middle of on the soccer pitch. So we need to take those things like that into account. And if we have an organized and rehearsed emergency action plan, we're going to reduce that likelihood of delay. I'll get to that in a moment. So this is a brief list of emergencies that may possibly come up at your organization. So these are all things we want to keep in mind as we're detailing our emergency policy, our broad emergency policy for our athletics department. But also we need to think about these things for each event that we're hosting. Obviously, if we're hosting a swim meet or some sort of indoor event where the gym is air conditioned, we really don't have to worry about heat and illness. However, an outdoor event in the peak heat season, then obviously that's something we need to address. Same thing goes for some of these other ones, like spinal cord injury. We don't have to really worry about that one in the pool, but maybe soccer is something that we need to think about that for. And most of your organizations do have some sort of emergency policy, but it's a blanket for the organization, and it doesn't really touch upon the specifics in the athletics department. So that's why it's important that athletics develops its own emergency policy. So, like I said, a lot of times your emergency policy for your school is not going to cover after school weekends and tournaments. It may your institutional emergency plan may say the emergencies must go through the secretary or through your reception people. Well, they're probably not going to be there. So we need to think about that with our athletics department. We need to think about personnel. Is the school nurse there? Are they not? Are you bringing in an outside person to do that? Where's the equipment? Is it in a locked room? Where's the AED? Where's the best way to get to that from the field? Thinking about all your venues in your emergency hospital. Where's the ambulance coming from? And then reviewing these sorts of, did I cover this emergency planning, this emergency action plan during my training and orientation session with my coaches? So these are here's the first resources I have for you. These are two great resources to help you navigate and build your emergency action plan detailed for the athletics department. Great. I'm just checking in on the chat, make sure So the first one is Anyone Can Save a Life. That is actually partnered with the NFHS. If you haven't heard of the NFHS, that's the National Federation of High Schools, and that's a US-based organization. Then this other one is the Corey Stringer Institute. That's actually help you build the X's and O's of your actual document. So this is, the first one is things to think about and things to address. The next one is actually how to build that document. So this is their website. They have a lot of great tutorials and great resources to navigate on the website. And there's even some walkthroughs on CPR AED usage. And then they actually have a guide. It's pretty detailed. It's about 60 pages or so. And this is all free and available to you. And this gives you an idea of what your organization should cover when building that specific plan. And then this is the Corey Stringer Institute. I'm going to talk about this again later when I'm talking about heat illnesses. But they have a really nice template that you can walk through and plug and play the specifics of your school. Like you see here, this is it's not going to be perfectly extrapolated to your international school, because remember, a lot of these resources are US centric. So like things like 911. I'm guessing your country doesn't use 911, they use some other number, but you can use this and adopt it to fit your needs. So the most common mistakes, putting this out in front, that I see when talking to schools about emergencies is that their plan is just unrealistic. It doesn't really address the specifics of the athletic event itself. Number one thing is that who makes the phone call? Well, we tell the school nurse to make the phone call, and then the school nurse isn't there for your event. So that's why it's important to review these specifically for your athletics department, but also the specific events that you're going to be hosting. It's too general. It doesn't really outline in detail what the address of the school is. What should they say when they're on the phone with the emergency services? It's not updated regularly for events. It's not changed as you encounter problems. It's not reviewed or rehearsed. It's in the handbook, but you never talk about it with your coaches, or even rehearsed. And this could be rehearsed in just a table format. You're gathered around a table with your coaches at your annual orientation, and you walk through the emergency plan, but you give a specific scenario and you talk it out. It doesn't necessarily need to be rehearsed on the field. That would be great, to be more hands-on about it and give more specific location-specific information, but at least we can talk about it and give a scenario at the table. Your visitors are unaware. They don't know that you have someone on site to take care of an injury. They don't know where the school nurse is. They don't know where the AED is. They don't know how to manage a general medical condition with a student that they're bringing on. Last one is crowd control. Put ourselves in the game, in the heat of the moment. You're hosting a big tournament. Someone has a cardiac arrest on the basketball court. What's everyone going to do? Panic, chaos. Okay, so it's important to detail how you manage the fans, how you manage the officials in that. And yeah, I think I'm gonna get to that. So specifically talking about venues, you wanna make sure you cover all your venues. Generally, the emergency plans that I see only cover their on-site locations. How many schools in this conference have off-site locations that don't have an emergency plan? I'm guessing a number. We need to cover the access points. Is there an elevator? If we call 911, how do they get access to the building, the facility, the doors, the locks? We have an AED, but it's in the nurse's office, and the nurse's office is locked on the weekend. The equipment involved, whether it be an EpiPen for an allergy or an asthma inhaler, where is that stored? Any hazards to get, like I said, about going up and down the elevator. How do we get the ambulance people there as quickly as possible, the EMTs? A lot of times there's an AED, but it's kind of hidden. It's kind of behind someone's desk and there's no sign for it. So making sure that it's indicated in signage around your buildings. And then your security and personnel. Who is actually going to be on site and who is going to be the best personnel to call the local EMTs? Does in your country is the operator English speaking? Is it better to have someone that's a native speaker make that call? Is that going to be a security person or an on-site liaison? And then we also want to think about our neutral sites or away sites. If you're playing local clubs or other schools that may not be that are local schools, who has the first aid kit or an AED? Should you bring one with you to that site? Is there going to be water at the field that you're playing at, or basic injury ice? What's that site's location? What's the address? What's the field condition? A lot of times in Shanghai, we had an off-site baseball field, and we would be scheduled to play a game, and we would realize that once we get there that the field is basically underwater because it rained the night before, or there's a big hole somewhere. So making sure that our facilities are in proper order. And that's going to involve communicating and coordinating with that host. Yeah, you may be playing another international school, but you're playing at a neutral field. Who's in charge of coordinating how we're going to handle an issue for that site? Transport. In Shanghai, actually, sometimes it was better to take a taxi than it was to take an ambulance, depending on the situation. Or you're going to use the transportation that got you to that site, like a school bus or wherever it may be. If that's the plan, now how do the kids get home? Or or where, if you're going to call an ambulance, where's that ambulance going to go? What's the emergency venue? Is it a hospital that has an English-speaking unit? In Shanghai, some hospitals had that option, like a unit for foreigners. I'm not sure if some of your sites have that option. And then where's that ambulance going to come from, and what's that response time going to look like? Again, maybe taking that bus that you came in on, or the school van or a taxi, maybe a better option. Maybe that may be quicker. Okay, and then your staffing. Who's in charge of your athletic events that you're hosting, or your practices? Who's going to be there? Is it a school nurse? I'm a certified athletic trainer. It's a new and growing profession in the international school setting. Like I previously said, there's about 15 athletic trainers in this setting right now, but we're not really found easily internationally. So is there some sort of profession out there locally that has some of the skills that a sports physio may have, or similar to an athletic trainer? In general, the skills that your local provider is going to lack is the emergency conditions. Is going to be recognizing concussions, exertional heat illnesses. So if you're going to bring in someone, like a physio, you're going to want to make sure that we get their level of knowledge up to where you want it to be. Is it an EMT? Another option is also, if you have a relationship with a local hospital, a local clinic, or even your embassy, utilizing that resources. Hey, you have a medical doctor at the embassy, and they're really interested in helping out with sports. Could you come out for a couple hours for this event? Towards the end, to see if there's any injuries to take a look at, or contracting through a medical clinic, an hourly rate. Sports physio to come out, or a nurse with some sports medicine background or training. These can be really good resources for you to have those conversations and see what resources are available to you on the ground in your city. And then there's also, like I previously mentioned, also contracting those services. I know in general, most international schools are not going to be able to develop an athletic trainer position. That's going to be a position where that athletic trainer works on site directly for that school. But however, could you form a partnership with a clinic that may be willing to hire internationally athletic trainer and then contract that to your school? That's something that's worth talking about if you have a good relationship with a medical provider in your area. And I could talk about that more if anybody has questions later on. So top recommendations for when you're considering who's going to be covering your event, try to have a consistent person. Try not to say, oh, to the Red Cross first responders, yeah, just send us anyone. Try to have the same person. So once they get oriented, they get comfortable, they know the coaches, they know you, they know the venue. And so that's going to ease the transition and provide the best service to your community. And making sure that they go through whatever risk management channels that that your school requires. Child protection safety, if it requires a background check of sorts. Making sure at least that person is a certified CPR AED first aid responder. And then, like I was saying, getting that knowledge up a little bit if they don't have the background in concussions, key illnesses, I even say here, child protection. If they don't have those fundamentals for identifying a concussion or how to appropriately treat the key illnesses that may be occurring there, making sure that we walk them through what we want them to do. And I'm going to provide resources on that. There's some great online trainings for things like these. Make sure you show them the venue. You talk out the emergency policy and what they're supposed to do and what you as an AED are supposed to do, where the supplies are, the equipment, the AED. A lot of times, we contract someone from the Red Cross or a physio clinic, and it's just like, okay, here you go, goodbye. Here's the schedule, and you really should make those introductions and make sure that they know where everything is. Make sure that the coaches know who your person is, and vice versa. The referees, if you have other people that are going to be on site, the nurse, if you're having a school nurse there, but you're also bringing a physio on, make sure they know each other and who's responsible for what. When it comes to staffing, please don't automatically think that something is better than nothing. I mean, would you want someone like this to take care of your injuries? Making sure we vet our people is going to take an extra step to make sure that they have an understanding of what a concussion is. But sometimes it can be better to get no advice than bad advice. We can talk about that more if anybody has questions on that. Making sure your program is offering the CPR AED first aid trainings. It'd be great if we could all build that into our orientation process to make sure that your coaches are also aware and up to date on how to manage a sudden cardiac arrest. Ideally, your organization should have instructors on staff and offer sessions throughout the year. A lot of programs make it mandatory for the coaches to have that certification, but then they never offer any trainings for that. So how are they supposed to do it? So if we have instructors on staff that have done the training themselves and they can certify people, or not even necessarily certify people, at least do the training session. And if they get the certification, that's just a bonus, but at least they know the basic life-saving skills. You could also partner with a local organization like the Red Cross or your medical clinics to have them bring instructors on site to your campus, or you work out some sort of partnership, some sort of relationship that offers more of these sessions to your staff. My number one recommendation for offering that, we usually think of the Red Cross or the AHA, the American Heart Association, but I really like ASHI, the American Safety and Health Institute. They're really flexible in how you become an instructor and the way you administer the training sessions. And in our setting, that's what we need. We need that flexibility. We need autonomy. And price-wise, they're very reasonable compared to some of the other organizations. Can be quite pricey to get an instructor certified. So I would refer you over to them if you are interested in getting more people on your staff become instructors. I can't really talk about emergencies without talking about concussions. I could talk for 2 hours just on concussions, but I just want you to make you aware that concussions are an injury that is occurring in athletics in the international school setting, it's just not getting picked up. So what a concussion is, it's a jolt to the brain, either from direct trauma or a very forceful stop-start mechanism, and it causes altered brain function. The reason why it's an issue for us in an international school setting is that in order to properly treat it, we need to identify it and then provide academic and physical modifications to allow the student to fully recover. Because if they don't, if a concussion goes undiagnosed in your organization and they take a second blow to the head, that puts them at risk for something called second impact syndrome, which may cause instant death. It's very rare, but it does happen. What more than likely would happen in a mismanagement of a concussion is a post-concussion syndrome. And that is in which a concussion that instead of normally resolving in about 7 to 10 days, the student feels feels the symptoms of a concussion for 1 month, 2 months, 6 months, a year, for an extended period of time. I personally had a student go through this. They didn't communicate. They took a head injury to their coach and kind of tried to play through it. And instead of resolving in a week or two, she felt the headache, dizziness, lightheadedness, difficulty focusing, difficulty concentrating for almost 2 or 3 months, and almost had to academically withdraw. So as a part of your emergency planning, or at least at your athletic conference, you should have some sort of concussion management policy in place. I did take a quick, Mike showed me some of the handbook for the conference. I would strongly recommend updating that to include educational aspect to all member schools and the coaches involved. Making sure that all the coaches are aware of what a concussion is, at least be able to initially identify that, hey, this kid may have a concussion, I think I need to pull them out. So the first step is education. And all these organizations here have great online training programs, not only for the coach, but also for the parent, for the student, and also your healthcare provider. The CDC specifically has a great online training, and also Parachute as well. That's the CDC of Canada. Has a great online training sessions for your school nurses to make sure that they can get their level up a notch to be able to identify those concussions and manage. So I would encourage SAISA to take a look at the policy and update it to include some education piece, but also here's a great resource to walk you through as an administrator what a concussion protocol needs to kind of look like. So this is from Nationwide Children's Hospital. This is in Ohio in the US. This is a great guide on how to detail the strategy of a modern concussion policy. And they have specific guides for the administrator. That's going to be all of you all on the call, but also for the educator, what they need to know in the classroom, and the parent as well. Okay, now, so I'm sorry, I can't talk about emergencies without talking about concussions in that brief little, at least snippet. So now I'm going to move towards exertional heat illnesses. I did take a look at some of your locations and what kind of temperatures and humidities you're looking at. And this should definitely be a part of your programs at the institutional level and also at the conference level to help guide safety for the students. A brief review of the different heat illnesses out there. So first one is just minor cramps, that the temperature gets hot, and people start to have muscle spasm, or they go outside and they start to feel briefly lightheaded or dizzy. That's known as heat syncope. Dehydration is kind of a separate issue. That's what we're talking about with heat illnesses is actually the internal body temperature. Dehydration can predispose us to an exertional heat illness, but it's kind of a separate type of issue that should be also addressed in educating your students in order to prevent. So we have 2 different types of conditions. Heat exhaustion and heat stroke are the things we really need to be worried about. So these temperatures here, that's internal body temperature. So we're reaching the point of heat exhaustion when our internal body temperature gets up to these temperatures. And then we're approaching heat stroke when our internal body temperature gets up to this level. The reason why this is an issue is if our core body temperature gets too high, our organs literally are cooking inside of our body. And we start to have organ failure, and then people will die from this type of condition. So how do we know the body temperature? Well, the only way to do it is is to get an accurate core body temperature is rectally. Measuring through the ear, measuring on the forehead, measuring under the tongue, they are not accurate. Even though we're in this COVID situation where everyone's doing temperature checks on the forehead, that is still not an accurate measure. So I urge you, we're obviously, we're not going to do rectal temperatures for a variety of reasons. Please don't base whether or not someone has a heat illness off of taking their temperature by ear, mouth, or head. It's not going to be accurate, which is kind of a scary thing. So how do we appropriately diagnose this or find out that there is indeed an emergency going on? Well, it's going to be based off the situation and what's happening with the student. So the symptoms associated, they may or may not be sweating. When they're approaching heat exhaustion, heat stroke. And let me just back up for a moment. People tend to think there's a natural progression when developing a heat illness, that you first start getting this, then you get this, then you approach heat exhaustion, then you approach heat stroke. Doesn't necessarily need to be a progression in those specific illnesses. A person can be out playing a soccer match, and all of a sudden, boom, they're in heat stroke. Okay, so you won't necessarily see cramping or lightheadedness, the fainting, before you approach heat exhaustion, heat stroke. Okay, so again, the symptoms: headache, dizziness, lightheaded, nausea, vomiting, altered breathing, in and out of consciousness, disoriented. They're out in the field and they literally look like they're drunk. They're difficulty balancing. They're muttering to themselves. They're not receiving instruction. So anytime it's a really hot and humid environment and that's happening, that needs to start setting off some red flags we need to manage this student. So how do we manage it? Rapid cooling. Anytime you suspect it is a hot and humid environment, and a student appears to not be acting themselves, they start to complain of, I feel really nauseous, they're not answering you. We need to cool them rapidly and immediately, even before we activate our emergency response, if it needs to get to that level. I'll get to that in a moment. So we see here, this is called water submersion. So this is these are just some options that you can think about implementing at your institution. It's a tub. You have it off to the side, filled with water, and if you suspect someone's approaching the heat illness, you just dunk them in there. This is another option. This is like a big, like tarp almost, and they have a cooler of ice water off to the side. They put the student in there, and then they fill it up. At a minimum, we need to plan on having ice packs available, whether it be ice in ice bags, or the gel packs, or the break type. And we need to immediately cool them by placing it over the major arteries of the body. So another option is also frozen towels. If your site has access to a fridge and a freezer, you soak towels, put them in the freezer so they're frozen for the match. And then if the emergency arises, you're able to quickly access that by either having them on the sidelines in a cooler, or you can have someone designated to run and get that if someone starts to have an issue. I mentioned ice bags, ice packs. Share. I'm not sure what I meant by that. Also, the option to relocate them indoors into a cooler environment with air conditioning and then apply the ice packs. That's also um, ideal to get them out of the hot and humid environment or get them in the shade before doing this sort of management. And then if they're not improving after you're applying this rapid cooling, you need to activate your emergency response because they may be approaching that heat stroke level and they're literally cooking inside of their own body. The reason why I say, and it's common practice, to do the immediate rapid cooling first is if we just jump into the emergency response, what are they going to do in between the time of you activating that and the ambulance getting there? They go through the ambulance, then they go to the hospital. That may be 30 minutes in which they've been cooking inside themselves. What's going to save someone's life is immediate rapid cooling if they're approaching heat stroke. Okay. So ideally, we want to prevent this. This is going to be educating our coaches, students, and parents on the risks of dehydration and signs to look out for that may predispose us to the heat illness. There's a great heat illness prevention program on the NFHS, about a 20-minute thing to walk through for coaches, gives them ideas to how to modify practices if we're in a really hot and humid environment. You're going to want a preseason acclimatization phase. So when if you're doing girls soccer outside and it's really hot and humid, you're going to need to take it easy for the first 7 to 14 days of practices to allow their body physiologically to accommodate that hot and humid environment. So building that into your scheduling. And then setting a policy in place how exactly to modify practice and events to accommodate a hot and humid environment. Water access, obviously, we want to ensure that all sites have that water access to allow them to drink. And with frequent breaks, a lot of times if we just practice plan or event plan that every 15, 20 minutes, we get them out in the shade and get them some water, taking frequent breaks, we can really prevent a heat illness from occurring. Think about setting up tents for your sites. If you're a big soccer pitch, sometimes you won't have anything on the sideline. So let's think about investing in shade for the kids to prevent this. And my resource for that, again, is going to be the Corey Stringer Institute. I previously mentioned that. They're kind of the leaders in the US on heat illnesses. And then I mentioned also the NFHS has this heat illness prevention online training. This is the Corey Stringer Institute. This is a nice document that is very informative on ideas to implement at schools and very specifics on how to adopt practice with work to rest ratios to help give your coaches the tools to prevent this from occurring. And then the NFHS has some nice position statements on heat illnesses and hydration. Okay, one of their statements is also monitoring body weight. So that's a way, if we just educate the students and the parents, sometimes these issues can just take care of themselves. That if we don't need to set up scales and monitor body weight every pre and post practice. If we make students and parents aware, it's something that they can kind of self-regulate. Potentially, you can lead a horse to water, you can't make it drink, to use a nice cliche. With your policy, you're going to want to have a temperature, a modification chart with temperature and humidity. Most of your schools, I'm guessing, don't have a WBGT meter. This is a wet bulb globe meter here. Most of you, I'm guessing, are going off a heat index. I'll get to that in a moment. So what a WBGT is it takes all the factors into account when taking temperature at your specific site. So think of it as a very location specific, taking wind factor, the solar radiation off the turf, all into account to give you an accurate measure of the true temperature and dangers of that specific location that you're in. And we also, if we're dealing with a turf situation, there's also solar radiation that's coming off of that. So it even takes that into account. It's about $200. I really don't recommend going off of heat index because it's only taking into account temperature and humidity, and it's not very accurate, reliable for your specific location. Generally, that heat index is coming from your local airport. So that data, how far is that from your actual field? Okay, so for $200 in a school like yours that may be predisposed to the heat illnesses, I think it's a worthwhile investment to possibly look into. So you take that information that you get off that meter and you compare it against the chart, a chart like this, a WBGT chart like this, and you see where you fall on the spectrum of how you should modify your practice. So I'm going to take an example. I have here average DACA in April. The high is 35, but the average is about 28, and a humidity of 66% to 100%. So let's take the average of 28 and 66%. So I'm here at the temperature. So you're on the field, you use your WBGT meter, and it says you have a temperature of 28 and a humidity of 66. So that's going to bring us down to right here of a true temperature of about 29 degrees. And then we refer to this chart over here. This gives different categories. That just means that's based upon US different regions. So your regions are probably going to be a higher risk category, so category 3. There's a much simpler way to break this down, and we could talk about that more. This is just what I pulled off. So we're at 29 degrees. So we're in this yellow zone between 27.9 and 30.5. And then this is our recommendations. Use discretion for intense prolonged exercise. So if you're having a 2-hour practice, you should have at least 3 separate breaks. Per hour. You should have about three breaks per hour of about 4 minutes each. So this is our moderate risk zone here. And then as we go here, we're getting into a higher risk, okay? And it gives the recommendations for each of those. So in an average day in April, I hope those numbers are somewhat true. That's just what I pulled off the internet. You're gonna want to, every hour, give at least 3 breaks to your kids outside. Okay, so that's about every 15, 20 minutes, there's a break built into a practice or the event. As we're winding down here, common barriers that I hear from athletic directors is that time and money is the principal barriers. Well, COVID-19, we have a lot of time on our hands right now. Most of these resources are free, to these instructional guides, these informational materials, things that walk you through the policy. And I would argue a catastrophic injury takes much more time and money. That a kid dying from a heat illness, a preventable heat illness during your tournaments is a lot more expensive and timely than spending a few hours on this, developing the policy and also reviewing that policy with your coaches. So imagine you're in a situation, imagine explaining to a parent why your program doesn't have an emergency action plan or a heat illness policy while their child is on the way to the hospital. That's going to be a very difficult conversation. So in closing, to wrap things up, I know I'm talking about a lot of different things that your schools may or may not have, and it requires you to take a look in the mirror. It takes us all to take a look in the mirror and say, is what we're doing now good enough for our students? So that requires us to be a little brave in that self-reflection and to have an honest conversation with ourselves. And if we have caring for the student at the center of our programs, that will drive us developing these educational and policy strategies. If we take the entire whole student into account, then we can make decisions on being reasonably prepared for emergencies that are kind of foreseeable, that may come. If you're in athletics long enough, you're going to deal with an emergency at some point. I hope we never have to, but every year we're in the business is more and more likely. Thank you very much to everyone that's attending today. Like I said, my mission is to help improve these things. So just by you being here and becoming aware of this, this is a great step for your conference and your school. Especially Mike. Thank you, Mike, very much for putting this together. You can find me on the social medias, Twitter and Facebook at Good Practice LLC. And here on my website, all the way at the bottom, when that thing disappears, goodpracticellc.com. I have a resource page where all this stuff is. I'm going to share this with Mike, this presentation, and you guys feel to take it and do whatever you'd like with it. And so now I'm happy to stop sharing.
I got a couple questions there, Jared.
Yes. Okay.
Mike asked, first off, I'll work backwards. The wet bulb globe thermometer, are those widely available, or is it just something we could pick up only in specialty shops?
Amazon.
Okay.
I don't have a specific. I don't have a specific brand or anything. I would recommend taking a look at. Well, first figure out what your price range is. I think is probably the first step. Can we only afford $100, $200, or can we get something a little bit more robust? I don't have a brand recommendation. See what's in your price range. Read the reviews. Available on Amazon and any other online stores.
Great, good to know. What are the most common health issues that you see us experiencing among these?
You're having concussions. My colleagues in Asia, I didn't put it into this presentation, but we do have some preliminary data on concussions in the international school setting. Unfortunately, it's not very heavily explored. I hope in the future we can develop this more. But in general, in a typical international school, we're averaging about one per month in general. So I'm talking about a school with about 1,000 kids, and that has a pretty typical athletics program. We're roughly about one a month. We're seeing, and so if your school, you can extrapolate that to your own school. If you're, 700 students and fairly normal amount of athletics, maybe you're only dealing with 7 during the school year or 5. But how many are you truly seeing now? So I would encourage you definitely to start educating your people on what a concussion is and start moving towards a direction of developing a policy, working with your school nurse on that. Of the things I talked about, I think that's the one that's pretty glaring. But we also need to be prepared for a big emergency like a cardiac arrest. That's going to be much more rare. But there's these concussions going on, and we need to manage that.
How about in your review of concussion training resources? What's your opinion? Are some better than others?
I can only recommend the ones that I put in my presentation. I can't speak to other ones because I know the ones that I'm providing are good information. So I put on 3, one from the NFHS, the CDC, the Center for Disease Control in the US, and then Parachute in Canada. I would recommend one of those over the other, depending on your program and your audience. Those 3 resources also offer different language options. So the ones in America, the NFHS and the CDC, they offer in English and Spanish. So I'm guessing, knowing your countries, I don't know if there's much of a Spanish community within your own international school community. And then the one in Canada has a French option. So maybe there's a French community. So it offers different language options. I can only speak to those 3, and I would recommend those.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually just last week, with some of this time I had on my hands, was trying to vet and figure out which one to have my coaches do. I settled on the NFHS because of the other options that they had available. I was like, oh, if you do this and then also do the heat illness one, and you do the ACL injury prevention one. I really liked the Canadian one. I felt like that was more comprehensive.
Yes.
But I also checked out Australia's, and I found it a little lacking.
I'll be honest. the reason why the U.S. I am American. I'm sorry. The reason why we're ahead on the concussion thing is because we have American football. That's our number one sport. We have tons of experience on the head injuries. I didn't get into, like I said, I could talk for 2 hours about concussions. I didn't get into the history we have in the U.S. on how that progressed, this becoming an issue. But the U.S. is kind of leading the way on the research. And as an athletic trainer, we see concussions on a very regular basis. So athletic trainers are also kind of leading the charge on research. I really cannot recommend any British or Australian resources at this time. I have reviewed some of them. From my experience, education, and training, I cannot recommend any of them.
Yeah, it seems like some of that's starting to come out of rugby programs. They're starting to recognize the need for it.
Yeah, Jared?
Yes.
The three you recommended, if all of our schools had their coaches do one of those three, basically we'd all have the same kind of information? Correct.
In general, if we're talking about coaches in a typical international school, I'm recommending the NFHS. It's quick. It's only 20 or 30 minutes, and it gives you very coach-specific situational type of things. Just like Ryan was just saying, the Canadian version, it's much more robust. It takes about 45 minutes. It's a little bit more dry, to be honest. But the advantage of the Canadian one is it offers in French language, which is really nice. Being in a Francophone country, that's a really nice option. So in general, yes, for your organization, if all your coaches did the NFHS online training, awesome.
I guess my question is, so all my coaches are CDC trained. And good. Is that, like, if everybody else starts doing NFHS, they're CDC trained, not a problem, right?
Not a problem. Yeah. The CDC and the NFHS are actually partnered. So it's a lot of the same information. I just think the NFHS one, it's a better, like I said, it's very coach specific. It brings it home a little bit better, I feel. But CDC is no problem at all.
I'm wondering if I appreciate the need for it for everybody. I imagine that I might have some coaches who are like, I coach swimming. Like, why, heat injuries are not going to be an issue for me. Or I'm a table tennis coach. When are we going to have a concussion in this sport? Can you give tips on how to deal with that pushback?
I think Todd's itching to say something.
Yeah, I've seen concussions, maybe not in table tennis, but I've actually seen them in swimming. And I think you just make a blanket statement to all your coaches. You want to coach at our school, you will do this, regardless of what you're coaching. Obviously, if you're coaching contact rugby or boys basketball or boys soccer, something like that, you're going to have more. But regardless, that's the policy.
The other piece I would throw in there is that you're going to have a lot of concussions happen in your school that aren't sport related. And the more people you have trained in the building, the more it's going to be handled properly in all the different places.
Yeah, I'm recognizing that need for awareness across the board. I'm thankful for this time that our nursing staff right now has downtime, so I'm able to push things like this into their hands, so they're able to become much more aware of it. Because I think on a normal day they don't have the time to do much professional development, and suddenly they do. So.
Yeah, I would just wrap that up by saying, the international school is also an academic setting as well. So even though you have a table tennis player, they could still fall playing outside and hit their head, and they may not get picked up, being able to identify that they may have a concussion. So even the table tennis coach, the kid's not acting right, and you say to them, what happened? Oh, I fell, I hit my head. Anything can happen on the playground. And as an academic institution, we need to make sure we provide that accommodation. So even though, table tennis, the odds are you're still going to encounter one at some point.
Everybody else, I think that's all the questions we had come up in the chat. Other people want to chime in?
I had a question about your CPR first aid recommendation for ASHI. We currently do the American Heart Association. And it's great because my nurse she's certified so she can deliver it. She'll eventually leave, so that's one issue. But we seem to run into a problem. I don't know if ASHI has the same thing. She can only train 6 people at a time. And so the biggest issue I have is creating time to get people the training that they need. And I wonder if ASHI, how many can be trained at once and that kind of thing.
Like I said, it provides a lot of flexibility. I'm sorry, I don't have the number off the top of my head of the instructor to student ratio, but I think it's going to be more flexible than 6, and it's much more affordable.
American Red Cross is not probably comparable in some ways, but they definitely have done a lot in moving towards sort of the flipped classroom approach, where people are able to do a lot of it online and then just go in for a 1-hour test by the certified trainer. That's helped us. Keeping our certifications with American Red Cross lately has become a bit of a nightmare, but
yeah, most people find that the Red Cross and the Heart Association, they tend to be very rigid in their delivery, and from experience, ASHI just offers a lot of flexibility, and they're also very rigid in instructors maintaining their certification. Again, ASHI, they use the same standards. They all use the same tool. They all use the same tool. The same standards. But ASHI, I think, gives us the flexibility in our setting. That's a tough thing to solve is this certification process.
Hey, Jared, a quick question here. Our school, Lincoln School in Kathmandu, Nepal, we have all our coaches go through the National Safety Council for our first aid certification. Are you aware of them and what they offer in comparison to the other organizations at all?
No, I'm sorry. Where's that based out of? The National Safety Council. Is that?
I see. Based out of the U.S.
I would have to look into that and get back to you.
Okay.
Happy to do so.
Our nurse can certify, like, basically what it is like an online thing that actually takes a while. I can't remember how. Z, do you know how long it takes to get it done online? And then our nurse has to go through like an in-person skills test. But that's kind of mandated for all our coaches. And then there's also all our staff actually now have to go through that as well.
Okay. And then is that just for CPR, AD, first aid that you're using? Okay.
Yeah.
Happy to look at it and get back to you.
Okay. Appreciate it.
So Luke, your process would be they do the training online and then they just have to arrange to meet with her for like how long of a session to get checked off?
Exactly.
How long would that session be?
It's usually a couple 2-hour sessions through like after school. She kind of gives different ways of doing it. You can do like these after school sessions from like 4 to 6 p.m. or take like a Saturday morning or Saturday afternoon and get like it all checked off that way as well. But it's a few hours in person to kind of check it off. And then I can't remember, I did it last. It's a 2-year certification. So I actually did it last, maybe the beginning of last school year. And I can't remember how long it took me, but I know it takes a little while to kind of get through it, but it's nice that she's able to certify us. So that's kind of why we've done it. It's been helpful in that way.
Yeah. With the AHA, it takes the whole day to get it through the training.
Yeah, 6 at a time.
Yeah, that's tough. That's another thing is that time frame, carving out that time. Again, ASHI allows flexibility on that delivery method. And as far as like reputableness, ASHI is held in a very high regard, just as Red Cross and AHA is. Just so, for example, I haven't heard of the National Safety Council. In general, as long as they're using the same standards, then in theory it should be the same.
I think it's safe to say if anybody's dealt with Lincoln's nurse, they know that it's going to be to standards. She's pretty thorough.
Serious thorough, for sure.
Great.
Yeah.
I was out for a little bit. Power went off. Don't know if this has been covered. Just tell me it's in the replay and I can watch it later. But did you speak at all, Jared, to like, so a lot of what you're talking about with traumatic stuff, we're going to be dealing with in an EAP with our first responders and that kind of stuff. They're going to be the main people that are involved. The coaches are kind of going to be the ancillary people, deal with crowd control, whichever, that kind of stuff. For our coaches, other than concussion, which we know we want to make sure they're trained in, what is the most common international school event injuries that we can be kind of guiding our coaches to be paying attention to, like ACLs for girls, like, whatever, I don't know.
Yeah, it would be great. Now we're just talking kind of general program features. It would be great to have injury prevention programming built into our practice plans. So those coaches utilizing the good resources of, I'm going to say the example of, so say soccer, girls soccer. There's a great injury prevention program out there for FIFA, by FIFA. So carving out a little bit of practice time to prevent that ankle sprain, to prevent that ACL tear, to whatever, hamstring strain, whatever it may be. I would say if as a culture in your athletic program, if you can make it the expectation that the coaches should implement some off the ball strength and conditioning and injury prevention, I think that would be great to prevent those ankle sprains and knee issues or whatever it may be. However, yeah, I'm focusing on the big picture emergency life-threatening things, but that's also a great thing to take into account as well. I had another point to hit on. Injury prevention.
Something in the same vein that maybe where you were thinking of, because I remember when working with you when we used to be in Shanghai, when you're at a tournament and you've got your kid suffers a minor injury, a rolled ankle, a twisted knee or something that doesn't take them out, the return to play process for coaches to think about in terms of how to return them to where they're going to go.
Yeah. So hopefully, I mean, it would be great, again, if all the coaches were first aid, not only CPR AD, but also first aid. So be able to apply the basics, compression on the ankle, icing the ankle, those sorts of things. That would be great to have. That's why institutionally, if each of our institutions had a good provider on site with some basic orthopedic evaluation techniques, like you're bringing in that physio that can look at an ankle, that your coach from Dhaka is in Muscat, and Muscat is contracting a physio with some basic with some resources available. If you can able to refer to that person, from a liability standpoint, it's tough for coaches to make those sorts of decisions, and it puts a lot of responsibility on the coach to say, hey, I think your knee's okay, let's get you back out there. I would defer to whatever resource you have available to make that decision for the coach. I personally don't like putting too much responsibility on the coach. So being able to apply those initial things and then defer to whatever resource you have available. But in general, making a decision from a liability perspective and managing risk, if they're not walking right and they can't move and they can't even do your dynamic warm-up, then they obviously shouldn't be playing.
Oh, that's kind of, and it's when we have our events, we've got people there. Like everybody has their nurse. We're quite comfortable that they will give us the correct, and we'll follow what they say in terms of return to play stuff. I'm more in it. Maybe I don't know what it's like at your places, but sometimes I'm sending coaches across town with the team, and they're not going with our nurse. It's just them and the coach. Mm. And if it's something serious, there's no problem. Like the goal, like it's injury. The injury report is pull them off and live to fight another day. It's just DACA sports, right? It's the ones that aren't very clear. The kid who's trying to tough it out, not really, you're not sure about. And I'm more of, and what I've done, like giving coaches some strategies of what to do with that kid to prove to them they shouldn't be going back in the game. Like, okay, do our dynamic warm up. Let me watch you. And then as soon as you see them doing it and you can't actually go through a certain movement, you're like, okay, you're done, and that's why.
Yeah, I would say that's a good, first layer. If they can't do sport specific movements and the dynamic warm up, and they're obviously limping, they really shouldn't be playing, because that's going to set them up for something else. I may not be worried about that minor ankle sprain right now, but if they can't cut, pivot, land appropriately, I'm worried about their other knee blowing out.
Yeah.
So, I think that approach is good. Running them through a couple basic sport-specific movements and a dynamic warm-up. And if they can't objectively do that, then, they're done.
Thanks. Anybody else have anything you want to ask?
See, I'm in total ask question mode from the conference the last couple of days.
DD machine.
So when you were showing us, I don't know which guidelines it was from. It was the heat, illness, exertion, and the sidebar was all about practice recommendations. Like every hour, do 4 breaks of this amount of time, blah, blah, blah. Is that the same in competition, or should there be a different set of guidelines when you're in full exertion with 2 events a day that are more than 2 hours? I'm just like, would we just take the practice guidelines, or is there something that says gameplay guidelines for?
As far as I'm aware, those guidelines are for all activity. So any activity, any outdoor activity. So that would be inclusive of games as well.
Okay, because I was just thinking, like, practices have built-in stop times, right? Whereas a game is not stopping except for when stop is required. So I was just wondering if it was any different.
Typically, you do a drill for 15 minutes, you stop. You do a drill for 15 minutes, you stop. In the game. But if you see those guidelines, a lot of them, it was pretty similar to that type of structure. It was during a 1 hour window, you should be stopping 3 or 4 times in that window. So in a game situation, let's just say soccer, a 45-minute half, you're taking at least 1 stop there. Probably, and depending on the temperature, you may take 2 stops.
Okay. It was just the practice game language that I was wondering.
I understand what you're saying. Maybe at an institutional level, that could be touched up upon in your planning for an event, that you take that into consideration, that we're going to do it every 15 minutes, right? It also depends on the game format as well.
All right, it's getting kind of quiet. Mike, we'll give you one more.
I don't have any more questions, but I just I wanted to say that thanks to Jared. We put this together in a week, which I'm very appreciative of, the way that you're able to just fit into our time slot and make all that work out, especially knowing that you've been busy the last couple of days sitting in front of a computer as well. It's funny, I met Jared because I had to take Dylan. You guys all know Dylan. He banged his head at his school, and took him straight to Jared, and Jared helped me explain to him that he wasn't playing basketball for the rest of the weekend, which was an awesome, and we still talk about it today because he says he was completely fine, and that he's still fine, and he doesn't have any head injury issues, which is where I became a big fan of prevention and proper dealing with the injuries and stuff. I guess the last thing I'd say is Jared, through this whole process, has been very gregarious, and I know he would be a great resource, and you can probably just slip him an email at any time about any questions you have related to student health and safety, and he'll be happy to bounce back to you and get something back to you. So I put you on the spot, Jared, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Again, my mission is just to help keep kids safe. And I know I covered a lot today, and it can be a little, you start to feel panic, like, oh, we're not doing nearly as much as this is outlining. Like I said in the beginning, please just have a long-term approach towards our end goal is just keeping the kids safe, and let's take incremental steps to get there and work together as an athletic conference and as, you know, with your other international school colleagues as well to get there and exchange information. We're doing it like this here at Lincoln in Nepal, but what are you guys doing over in Muscat or Chennai or whatever? And the more conversations you have, the more you can refine and do what's best for your school. And please use me as a resource. The social medias or through my website, you can drop me a message. Happy to help anytime.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jared.
Okay,
pleasure.
thank you very much.
Let you go, buddy.
Bye, everyone.
Best to all you during this time.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks.